On housing, I would like to highlight two different challenges. First, there is challenge of slums. In the previous period of the Millennium Development Goals, there was some advances in certain countries where the lives of slum dwellers were improved significantly, but at the same time many more slum dwellers have been added, so we need different strategies there. We need to continue with slum upgrading, which some countries are doing in a very positive manner, but at the same time we also need to review housing policies. We need to put housing policies within a framework or broader urban policies whereby location of housing is questioned. Housing is not only directed to where land is cheapest, because that creates a lot of problems in terms of mobility and in terms of connection between housing and employment. So we need to continue our attention to people living in slums and at the same time review the way we want to promote housing both by government and by private sector.
One of the key aspects of successful cities in Africa, Asia and much of Latin America is that they attract people because they concentrate economic opportunity, but there's no possibility for those with limited income to find legal housing. Generally they double up or triple up together within existing housing, or they move on to informal settlements. Of course, moving on to informal settlements, it's very difficult to access government-provided infrastructure and services. So provision for water is awful, provision for drainage is awful, provision for sanitation can even be non-existent. It's difficult for them to get their children into schools. Very often you need to have a legal address to do so. Healthcare provision is usually very poor. So the consequences, even for successful cities, are of a third, half, or even three-quarters of the population living in very poor quality accommodation. Some people think that poor quality housing is associated with weak economies. It's often associated with very strong economies. I suppose there's two routes that if we think of the last 20 years, there's two routes by which housing conditions have improved. One, which we see mostly in Latin America, is stronger democratization, local governments more accountable, mayors elected, strong social movements, strong pressure, which has made government more competent and more accountable in what they do. So you've had very large-scale upgrading of informal settlements. You've had the extension of piped water, sewers and drains to informal settlements. And there's been tremendous progress. It's not complete in most cities, but things are much better for low-income groups. Interesting variation in Thailand, where central government agency provided funding for community organizations as they organized their housing solutions, buying the land they were living on and upgrading, or buying other land, or renting land. In this instance, it was less government directed, but government supported and government funded. At the other extreme, you've got, in many nations in Asia and Africa, the federations formed by those that live in the informal settlements, that live in the squatter settlements, what are often called the slums. What is interesting about these federations is that they come to government and offer their skills and capacities to address housing issues together. So we've got many instances of where these federations got land allocated to them, and they design and build extremely good quality houses, much cheaper than contractors. Or they negotiate the right to have their settlement upgraded, and they work with the government to put in the infrastructure and improve the services. I think the two will come together as these federations and local governments learn to work together. So local government solutions and community-driven solutions will become more in harmony with each other, more supportive of each other.
You know, some of those basic urban services has been, clean water, clean air, a very good sanitation system, and also the mobility and energy. Those are the key urban services that we need in cities. And while many parts of the world, especially in the cities in the developed countries, those access problems perhaps has been solved to a great degree. While in case of developing countries, that the problem of access still remains an issue, and the type of issues the developing country cities face are dual, in a sense that at one hand they have to provide access, and in other hand that access has to be a bit more environmentally friendly also. So they have to, as I said before, that they have a grappling with the existing problem and also all these new forces coming into the system. They have to take into account both issues. We say that traditional issues like sanitation and the waste management, then bit more climate change kind of issue, and going a little bit up more consumption kind of issues. So all these three issues are coming together in the developing country cities. And also I think from now to 2050 about 2.8 billion people are going to live in cities, additional from what we have now, and most of that future urban growth would be in the cities in the developing world, countries like India, China, maybe Indonesia, and other parts of the world, and where all the infrastructure provisions and the way we make cities, how cities function, governance, all these issues remains to be bit weaker. So I think how we can provide those basic services by taking this opportunity that the urban areas are going to develop, more and more investment would be there, and how we can reorient some of those initial conditions that sets the urban system into the particular setup. I would call it lock-in effect. If we can reorient a little bit in bit more climate friendly way, environmental friendly way, I think we already do a lot of good work. And also from the delivery side also, how we provide urban services have changed. For example, traditionally it's not that only local governments provide those urban services. Now a lot of stakeholders come into picture. Private sectors are providing a lot of services, especially drinking water or even sanitation services, waste management service. So how the public sector works with the private sector and in a way most effective and economically efficient, I think we have to reconcile with all these requirements and also the actors and how to work together. I think that is I think fundamentally important.
It is a fundamental human right, because so far as we are not in an apartheid society where you can decide who to go where, then I think that it is very important for the city authorities and government for that matter to provide housing for almost everybody in the society. The point is that the private sector will not provide on charity. They provide based on profit. So if the government does not make an attempt to provide social housing, either by giving service plus, either by giving subsidy or something to allow everybody to have decent housing, and housing in its entirety, which comes with environmental services, police stations, education facilities, health facilities, then even those in the gated communities will be challenged by urban crime and other environmental hazards that will be generated by those who are excluded from the urban services.
One of the things that cities can do actually is enable us to address some of the destructive forces that we're wreaking on ecosystem services. And cities actually can be quite vibrant places for ecology, but that will not continue unless we manage those properly. So in cities we have a combination of climate issues, a combination of trees, vegetation, animals, insects, and a complete ecosystem of that kind. And they're connected very directly to the ecosystem surrounding the city. And one of the things we're not doing as cities is protecting the water catchments to enable our water supply to be maintained, but also, of course, the water supply to ecosystems themselves. So what is tending to happen is that the ecosystems are being damaged by pollution and by water being directed through flood systems, and starving the ecosystems from that water. So what we have to do is have a management approach to ecosystem services in cities. And one of the really innovative approaches that's now being taken is something called a biodiversity index, which measures the amount of local ecosystem, vegetation, animals and insects that there are in the city, but also actually measures the value they have to society in terms of supporting human health. If people have access to green space, they have better mental health outcomes. And so basically the biodiversity index also measures the management system. So if you have a management system to look after all of that, you get higher points on the biodiversity index. So it is now possible for cities to use that index to assess and to guide them in terms of improving the protection of ecosystem services in cities.